There is a quiet misunderstanding in our world, a belief that those who prefer staying at home are missing out, that they are hiding, that they are afraid of life. But psychology tells a very different story. In a society addicted to movement, noise, and constant interaction, the person who chooses stillness appears strange. Yet often that choice is not weakness, it is wisdom. People who love staying at home are not running from the world. They are returning to themselves. And that difference changes everything. Home, for them, is not just a physical space. It is a psychological container. A place where the mind is no longer performing, defending, or adapting. When the external world demands masks, roles, and endless responsiveness, the inner world demands honesty. Home is where those masks dissolve. This is why solitude feels nourishing to them. Not because they dislike people, but because they understand something most never learn. Constant stimulation fragments the self. The psyche needs quiet to reorganize. When someone spends time alone, thoughts that were drowned out by noise begin to speak. Emotions that were postponed finally surface. Unconscious material dreams, intuitions, creative impulses find space to emerge. This is not isolation. This is psychological digestion. Home, for certain individuals, is far more than a physical structure made of walls, rooms, and familiar objects. Psychologically, it functions as an inner sanctuary, a space where the external world loosens its grip, and the psyche is finally allowed to rest. In a culture that equates growth with constant movement and worth with visibility, choosing home is often misunderstood. Yet beneath this choice lies a deep psychological intelligence that understands the necessity of inner safety for emotional balance and self-coherence. The human mind is not designed for uninterrupted stimulation. Every interaction, sound, expectation, and demand places a subtle strain on the nervous system. For those who experience the world deeply, this strain accumulates quickly. Home becomes the one place where vigilance softens. Here, the mind no longer scans for approval or threat. The body relaxes because it is no longer required to perform. This sense of safety is not accidental. It is essential for psychological regulation. Within the sanctuary of home, identity stabilizes. Outside, individuals often fragment themselves to fit different roles: professional, social, familial. Each role requires adaptation, suppression, or exaggeration of certain traits. Over time, this fragmentation creates inner fatigue. At home, these masks fall away. The psyche returns to a more unified state where thoughts, emotions, and instincts can coexist without contradiction. This environment allows unconscious material to surface. Feelings that were postponed during the day begin to emerge. Thoughts that had no space to form finally take shape. Creativity often arises here, not because the person is forcing it, but because the mind is no longer crowded. The unconscious does not reveal itself in chaos. It requires stillness. Home provides that stillness. For many, the love of home reflects a relationship with depth rather than surface. These individuals are not driven by the need to constantly confirm their existence through social feedback. Instead, they draw a sense of reality from internal continuity. Their self-worth is less dependent on external validation because it is reinforced through reflection and self-connection. This does not make them detached from others. It makes their connections more deliberate. Home also acts as a boundary. Choosing to stay in is often an unconscious declaration of limits. It signals an understanding that energy is finite and must be protected. Psychological maturity includes knowing when not to engage. In this sense, home becomes a filter, allowing only what is meaningful to pass through. This selectivity preserves emotional clarity and prevents the erosion of identity that comes from overexposure. There is also a restorative rhythm at play. Just as the body requires sleep to repair itself, the psyche requires withdrawal to integrate experience. Without this integration, life becomes a series of reactions rather than a coherent narrative. Home offers the pause necessary for meaning to form. It is where experiences are metabolized rather than merely endured. The sanctuary of home is especially vital for those with heightened sensitivity. Such individuals absorb emotional atmospheres quickly. Crowds, noise, and social expectations penetrate deeply, often without conscious awareness. Home shields them from this overload. It is not avoidance, it is recovery. Without this refuge, their inner world would remain in a constant state of tension. Importantly, the preference for home does not imply fear of the outer world. On the contrary, It often reflects a conscious relationship with it. Those who value their inner sanctuary tend to engage with life more intentionally. They enter the world when they are resourced, not depleted. Their presence is quieter, but often more grounded. In psychological terms, home symbolizes containment. Containment allows emotions to be felt without overwhelming the system. It provides a sense of continuity when the outer world feels fragmented or unpredictable. This is why returning home can feel like returning to oneself. The physical act mirrors an inner movement toward wholeness. Ultimately, home as an inner sanctuary represents a refusal to live solely on the surface of life. It is a commitment to inner order in a disordered world. It is the recognition that before one can truly relate to others, one must have a place where the self is allowed to exist without interruption, without performance, without explanation. There is a common misconception that people who limit their social interactions do so because they are afraid of others. Psychology suggests something far more nuanced. For many individuals, reduced social engagement is not rooted in fear, insecurity, or avoidance, but in an acute awareness of how energy is exchanged. They understand, often intuitively, that every interaction draws from a finite psychological reserve, and they choose to spend that reserve with intention rather than obligation. Social environments demand constant adjustment. One must read cues, manage impressions, regulate emotions, and respond in real time. This process, while natural, requires cognitive and emotional effort. For individuals who are inwardly oriented, this effort accumulates quickly. Their withdrawal is not a reaction to people themselves, but to the invisible cost of continuous adaptation. They are not rejecting connection, they are protecting coherence. These individuals tend to experience interactions more intensely. Conversations are not casual exchanges, but psychological engagements. They listen deeply, absorb emotional undertones, and register subtle shifts in mood. Because of this depth of perception, even brief encounters can leave a lasting impression. Limiting social exposure becomes a way of preventing emotional saturation, not a symptom of discomfort with others. Selective energy also reflects a developed inner reference point. People who rely heavily on social stimulation often do so to stabilize their sense of self. Those who are selective have learned to generate that stability internally. They do not require constant interaction to feel real or grounded. Their sense of identity is less dependent on external feedback, allowing them to choose connection rather than seek it compulsively. This selectivity is frequently mistaken for disinterest or aloofness. In reality, it is often paired with a strong desire for meaningful engagement. Superficial interaction feels draining because it offers little psychological return. Depth, honesty, and presence are what replenish them. As a result, they may prefer fewer relationships, but those relationships tend to carry more weight and authenticity. Energy conservation is also a form of self-respect. Understanding one's limits requires self-observation and honesty. Many people override their own thresholds to meet social expectations, only to experience burnout, resentment, or emotional numbness. Those who are selective listen to early signals of fatigue and respond accordingly. This responsiveness prevents the buildup of inner tension that can later manifest as anxiety or withdrawal. There is an important distinction between fear-based avoidance and conscious restraint. Fear constricts and isolates, often accompanied by rumination and self-judgment. Selective energy, by contrast, is calm and deliberate. It does not involve shame or hostility toward others. It is simply a recognition that presence has a cost, and that cost must be honored. These individuals often thrive in solitude, not because they are lonely, but because solitude allows them to restore their psychological equilibrium. Time alone is not empty. It is structured by reflection, imagination, and emotional processing. This inner activity replenishes the energy that social interaction consumes. Without this balance, their inner world would become overstimulated and disorganized. Selective social engagement also enhances the quality of presence when they do choose to connect, because they are not constantly depleted. They can offer genuine attention and emotional availability. Their interactions tend to be slower, more thoughtful, and more grounded. Others may sense this depth, even if they misinterpret the person's limited availability. Culturally, constant sociability is often praised as confidence or openness, while restraint is viewed with suspicion. This bias overlooks the psychological diversity of human beings. Not all minds are designed to operate at the same level of outward engagement. For some, depth is the natural orientation, and depth requires space, Selective energy is, at its core, an act of psychological sovereignty. It reflects the ability to choose rather than react, to listen inwardly rather than conform outwardly. It is a sign that the individual values internal harmony over external approval. By honoring their limits, they preserve their capacity for insight, empathy, and meaningful connection, allowing their social world to be shaped by intention rather than expectation. The introverted renewal cycle describes a psychological rhythm in which inner-oriented individuals restore their vitality not through increased stimulation, but through intentional withdrawal. This cycle is often misunderstood as passivity or disengagement, yet it represents a highly functional process of self-regulation. Rather than seeking energy from the external environment, these individuals return inward to recalibrate, integrate experience, and regain clarity. Every interaction leaves an imprint on the psyche. For introverted individuals, these imprints accumulate quickly because they process experiences deeply. Sensory input, emotional exchanges, and social dynamics are not skimmed over. They are absorbed and reflected upon. Over time, this absorption creates a need for retreat, not as escape, but as psychological maintenance. Withdrawal is the signal that the system requires renewal. The cycle begins with engagement. Introverted individuals do participate in the world, often with sincerity and attentiveness. They listen carefully, observe keenly, and respond thoughtfully. However, this level of presence consumes energy. Unlike those who are energized by constant interaction, introverted individuals expend energy through engagement. The more intense or prolonged the interaction, the greater the internal cost. As this cost accumulates, the psyche naturally seeks balance. This is where withdrawal emerges. It is not abrupt or dramatic, but gradual and instinctive. The individual begins to feel overstimulated, mentally crowded, or emotionally heavy. These sensations are not signs of failure. They are signals of the renewal cycle activating. Ignoring them often leads to irritability, numbness, or exhaustion. During the withdrawal phase, solitude becomes essential. This solitude is not empty space, but a psychologically active state. Thoughts are revisited, conversations replayed, and emotions processed. The mind organizes what was experienced, placing it into a coherent inner narrative. Without this step, experiences remain fragmented and unresolved, contributing to inner tension. In this phase, the unconscious plays a significant role. Dreams may become more vivid, creative impulses stronger, and intuitive insights clearer. Freed from external demands, the psyche turns inward and begins its natural work of integration. This is where meaning is extracted from experience and where personal insight deepens. The renewal phase follows integration. After sufficient solitude, a sense of internal order returns. The individual feels calmer, clearer, and more grounded. Emotional reactivity decreases, and mental focus improves. This restoration is not the result of inactivity, but of inner work having been completed. The psyche has digested what it consumed. Once renewed, the individual is ready to re-engage with the world. This return is often marked by intentionality. They choose interactions more carefully, engage more fully, and bring with them the insights gained during withdrawal. Their presence may be quieter, but it is also more centered. They do not re-enter the world to escape themselves, but to express what has been clarified within. Problems arise when this cycle is disrupted. When introverted individuals are pressured to remain constantly engaged, the withdrawal phase is suppressed. Over time, this leads to chronic fatigue, emotional blunting, or a sense of inner disconnection. The psyche, denied its renewal process, begins to resist through symptoms rather than signals. Understanding this cycle reframes withdrawal as wisdom rather than weakness. It highlights the importance of honoring psychological rhythms rather than forcing uniform behavior. Just as the body requires rest after exertion, the introverted psyche requires solitude after engagement. The introverted renewal cycle also fosters depth. Because experiences are processed rather than bypassed, these individuals often develop strong self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Their insights are not immediate but distilled. They may take longer to respond, but their responses tend to carry weight. In a culture that values constant output and visibility, this cycle appears inefficient, yet psychologically it is sustainable. It preserves mental health, supports creativity, and allows for authentic engagement. Those who follow this rhythm are not withdrawing from life. They are ensuring they can return to it whole, present, and internally aligned boundaries are often misunderstood as barriers meant to keep others out. Psychologically, they serve a very different function. Boundaries define where one person ends and another begins, creating the conditions necessary for a stable sense of self. When individuals develop the capacity to set and maintain boundaries, it reflects not rigidity or coldness, but psychological maturity. It signals an internal clarity about needs, limits, and personal responsibility. In early psychological development, boundaries are often diffused. Many people grow up learning to adapt themselves to external expectations in order to feel accepted or safe. They become skilled at reading others, anticipating reactions, and adjusting their behavior accordingly. While this adaptability can be useful, it often comes at the cost of self-containment. Over time, the individual may lose touch with their own limits, experience chronic exhaustion, resentment, or confusion about identity. Mature boundaries emerge when a person begins to listen inwardly rather than react outwardly. This shift requires self-awareness. One must recognize internal signals such as fatigue, irritation, or emotional overload and interpret them not as flaws, but as information. Boundaries are the behavioral expression of this information. They translate inner truth into external structure. Setting boundaries often provokes discomfort, both internally and externally. Internally, it may challenge long-standing beliefs about being liked, needed, or approved of. Externally, others may resist the change, especially if they benefited from the individual's previous lack of limits. Psychological maturity is revealed in the ability to tolerate this discomfort without collapsing or retaliating. A boundary is not a demand that others change. It is a decision about what one will or will not participate in. This distinction is crucial. Immature boundary setting often takes the form of control or withdrawal. Mature boundaries are quiet and consistent. They do not require justification or dramatization. They are maintained through behavior rather than explanation. The capacity to set boundaries also reflects emotional differentiation. Differentiation is the ability to remain connected to others without losing oneself. Without boundaries, connection becomes fusion and individuality dissolves. With rigid boundaries, connection becomes impossible. Psychological maturity lies in the balance between openness and self-protection. People who develop healthy boundaries tend to experience relationships differently. Their connections are less driven by obligation and more by choice. They are able to say yes without resentment and no without guilt. This clarity reduces emotional turbulence and allows relationships to function on more honest terms. Boundaries are particularly significant for those who value inner stability. Protecting one's psychological space allows for reflection, creativity, and emotional processing. Without boundaries, the inner world becomes constantly interrupted, preventing integration and growth. In this sense, boundaries act as a container for the psyche, preserving its coherence. There is also an ethical dimension to boundaries. By taking responsibility for one's limits, an individual reduces the likelihood of passive aggression, burnout, or emotional withdrawal. Clear boundaries prevent the buildup of unspoken frustration that can erode trust. They create predictability, which is essential for psychological safety in relationships. Culturally, boundary setting is often mislabeled as selfishness. This misunderstanding arises from a confusion between self-centeredness and self-respect. Self-centeredness disregards others. Boundaries respect both self and other by clarifying expectations. They prevent the silent contract in which one gives too much and secretly hopes for recognition in return. The development of boundaries often coincides with a deeper sense of identity. As individuals become more grounded in who they are, they feel less compelled to accommodate everything and everyone. They recognize that preserving their inner equilibrium is not a luxury, but a necessity. This recognition marks a transition from living reactively to living deliberately. Ultimately, boundaries are not about separation, but about integrity. They allow individuals to remain whole in the presence of others, to engage without self-erasure, and to participate in life without sacrificing inner stability. When boundaries are established from self-knowledge rather than fear, they become a quiet expression of psychological adulthood. In a world driven by constant stimulation, those who choose depth over noise often appear out of step with their surroundings. Modern life rewards visibility, speed, and relentless engagement. Silence is interpreted as absence, and stillness is mistaken for stagnation. Yet psychologically, the preference for depth reflects an orientation toward meaning rather than motion, substance rather than spectacle. Noise in this sense is not merely sound. It is the accumulation of unnecessary input, endless opinions, rapid exchanges, surface-level interactions, and the pressure to respond instantly. While noise creates the illusion of connection, it often fragments attention and dilutes experience. Depth, by contrast, requires space. It unfolds slowly and demands presence. Those who seek depth understand that clarity cannot emerge from constant interruption. People oriented toward depth process experience internally before expressing it outwardly. They are less interested in reacting and more interested in understanding. This inward processing allows them to recognize patterns, emotions, and underlying meanings that are easily missed in a fast-moving environment. Their silence is not emptiness, it is incubation. Choosing depth also reflects relationship with time that differs from the dominant culture. Rather than rushing toward the next stimulus, these individuals allow experiences to settle. They revisit conversations, reflect on emotional responses, and integrate insights gradually. This slow digestion of experience leads to a more coherent inner narrative, where events are connected rather than scattered. Depth-oriented individuals often find superficial interactions draining. Small talk, performative engagement, and forced enthusiasm require them to operate on a level that feels disconnected from their inner reality. This dissonance consumes energy. Meaningful dialogue, on the other hand, feels restorative because it aligns with their natural mode of processing. Fewer words, when chosen carefully, carry more weight. Noise can function as a defense against inner awareness. Constant distraction leaves little room for uncomfortable thoughts or unresolved emotions. Those who choose depth are often willing to confront what arises in silence. They do not immediately seek escape from inner tension. Instead, they allow it to inform them. This willingness fosters psychological resilience and self-understanding. The preference for depth also influences how these individuals engage with knowledge and creativity. They are drawn to ideas that unfold complexity rather than simplify it. They value insight over novelty. Their creative expressions tend to be layered and reflective, shaped by long periods of contemplation rather than bursts of activity. Depth over noise is not a rejection of the world, but a selective engagement with it. These individuals may participate less frequently, but when they do, their presence is often grounded and attentive. They listen more than they speak, and when they speak, it is usually from a place of considered thought. This quality of presence can feel stabilizing to others, even if it is not immediately recognized. There is also a moral dimension to depth. In a noisy environment, opinions are often formed quickly and defended loudly. Depth requires humility, the recognition that understanding takes time, and that certainty is often premature. Those who value depth are more comfortable with ambiguity. They can hold conflicting ideas without needing immediate resolution. This orientation often develops through introspection. Time spent alone allows for self-examination, which refines perception and strengthens inner orientation. As a result, these individuals rely less on external cues to determine value or direction. Their choices are guided by internal coherence rather than social momentum. Culturally, depth is undervalued because it is less visible. It does not announce itself. It does not trend or perform well in short bursts. Yet it is depth that sustains long-term meaning, emotional stability, and authentic connection. Noise may create movement, but depth creates understanding. Those who choose depth are often content with fewer experiences that resonate deeply rather than many that leave no trace. They are not trying to fill space. They are trying to understand it. Their lives may appear quieter, but internally they are rich with reflection, insight, and continuity. Choosing depth over noise, they align themselves with what endures rather than what merely passes through attention.